All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Mussar Mondays. We are on page 508 in the 26th chapter of this magnificent work of Ramchal. And we started last week, it wasn't last week, it was 2 weeks ago, we started speaking about holiness. And we said holiness is the ability to be isolated from a world of distractions, isolated from a world of I don't want to say only distractions, but anything that interferes with our relationship between us and the Almighty is really an opposition to holiness. Holiness means pure. It means without any interruption between us and God. Okay, so we're on top of page 508. Ramchal now turns to describe the qualities of the Kadosh in greater depth. Well, Kadosh is someone who's holy. Someone who's holy, that's the ideal position that we're looking to find ourselves in, to be a holy person. What does that mean to be a holy person? Now, for the person who has become sanctified with the holiness of the Creator, meaning that he is on a level where he can interact with the Almighty without interruption, where he connects to the holiness of God and is able to be without any barriers between him and the Almighty. He says not only are his spiritual activities holy, but even his physical activities, such as eating, turn into actual matters of holiness. V'simonich achilas kodoshim. And a representation of this concept for you, to make it understandable, is the act of eating sacrificial offerings by the Kohanim. Right? So the Kohanim, one of the things that they would do is that they would eat the food from a sacrificial offering, and it was considered a very, very holy activity. But we know that many people get carried away with eating, and it's not exactly so holy. So what are we talking about here, saying that it's a holy endeavor, that eating food can be a holy endeavor? Well, you have to understand. Okay, what does that mean that it's a holy endeavor, that it could become a holy endeavor? He says, Shihi atzma mitzvah saseh, which itself, eating the sacrificial offerings, is a positive commandment in the Torah, and about which the sages of blessed memory said, Kohanim ochlin uva'alim miskaprim. He says the Kohanim would eat the offerings, and the owners of the offerings, the people who brought it as a sin offering, right, they would achieve atonement for their sins. Thus, a physical action involving physical things, the consumption of meat, can be transformed into something completely holy. Sanctified Kohanim performing the mitzvah of eating sanctified meat, and thereby effecting atonement for the owner. So something which is a completely ordinary, mundane act of eating can become a completely spiritual and holy endeavor, because it's not just eating. Why? We mentioned this last week. I'm just going to give you an example. Okay, so if two people are sitting and eating a donut together, okay, enjoying a good donut together, a kosher donut, of course, right? So imagine one person. By the way, just our family tradition, when we drive up to New York, we stop off in Atlanta. They have a kosher Krispy Kreme there, and it's like the pilgrimage, right? The whole family, we all get out of the car, and this is part of our one of our favorite experiences. But either way, there is so two people are eating donuts. Okay, now one person stops and says, "Thank you, Hashem. Baruch Atah Hashem, praise to you, Hashem, creator of heaven and earth. Asher Kiddishanu, right? He blesses God and thanks Hashem, Shakol Niyeh B'dvaro, that everything is from Hashem's will, and eats his donut. Borei Minim Mizonot, right? That God is the creator of all foods, of all pastries, right? So now this person is not just eating a donut. He has now elevated this food to a whole new level of, like we're saying with the sacrifices. It's become, right, because this now is a vessel through which he connected to God on a holier level. The other person sitting with him may have just wolfed down this donut without saying a blessing, without recognizing where it comes from. So that's a very physical adventure. It's physical only. There wasn't an involvement of anything holy, of anything sanctifying this food. So here we see two people doing the exact same thing. One person stopped and made it a sanctified experience, a holy experience. He infused it with holiness, while the other, it stayed just a physical experience. Okay, so we see how just a physical act doesn't necessitate it remaining only a physical act. That physical act can become a spiritual act. Because now this food became a vessel through which I have elevated myself from this food, because I used it as a tool to connect to Hashem. And that's our goal. Our goal is to find ways to elevate ourselves constantly through the physical things that's holiness. That's holiness. So the same activity that the whole world can do, we can, just by drinking a glass of water, we sanctify God by saying the blessing, Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, she'akol niyeh b'dvaro. We say the blessing for it. You can say it in English as well, that everything was created by Hashem. That little blessing makes this water not the same ordinary water anymore. Now it is holy water. It's something which is sanctified. It's something which is holy. Okay. In chapter 16, Ramchal explained that the deeds of a tahor, of a pure, holy person, one who has achieved the trait of tahara, of purity, are completely free of any ulterior motive. They are done only for the sake and the benefit they provide in the service of Hashem. Here, Ramchal contrasts the physical actions of the pure person with those of the kadosh person, the holy person, whose actions are in an even higher spiritual plane. And let's see what he means here. He says, "V'tire ata," and you'll see now, right? You see here the difference. Hahefresh shebein atorv lakadosh. We'll see here now the difference between the tahor, someone who's of the level of purity, versus the one who is at the level of holiness, right, which is on a higher level, right, regarding the relation to physical activity. HaTohor masav achomrim enam lo elo hechrechim, right, the one who is tahor, who's pure, his material actions are for him nothing but unavoidable necessities. I gotta eat, right? So I'm only eating what I need to eat to keep myself, to sustain myself. That's why I eat. And he himself, when performing these actions, focuses only on the necessity, not on any personal gain or pleasure. Meaning, I'm not eating to enjoy the food. I'm eating because I need to eat. I need to sustain my body. It's a very big difference. But, lechlal kedusha lo bo, this person who's pure, right? Sorry, skipped a little. Right? V'nimtza sha'alidei ze yotzim misug hara shebachomrius v'nisharim tahorim. As a result of this pure-mindedness, his actions are excluded from the negative category of material matters and remains pure. Meaning, he's not running after his desires. He's not running after what I can eat more, what I can, do more, right, in a physical sense. But rather, he's doing what the necessity. This is what I need for my sustenance. This is what I need for my own life, so that I can sustain myself. He says, however, even though the actions have no trace of negativity, they still have not reached the higher level of Kedusha. What is that higher level? For despite the purity of such actions, if it were possible to exist without them, kvar yoser tov, right? Then that would surely be even better. The Kadosh, the one who is holy, who cleaves constantly to God, and whose soul travels constantly among the concepts of true knowledge. It means he's not in the lower realms of physicality, of mundane activities in this world. He's on a higher realm. Be'avas bore v'yiraso, suffused with love of his creator and fear of him. Hine nechshav lo ki'ilu hu mishalech lifnei Hashem ba'artzos hachayim. He is indeed considered as if he were walking before Hashem in the land of the living, i.e., the world to come. Odenu po b'olam hazeh, even while he's still here in this world, meaning, although physically he's in this world, but he's really living in an alternative experience because of his closeness to God. He's not facing let's call it, the lowly struggle of the pure person to make everything sanctified and not to take anything for himself, just to do what he needs, the very minimal that he needs to sustain himself. Here, someone who's holy is on a much higher plane. Anything he does is really on a much higher level of holiness and spirituality. V'hine ish kozeh hu atzmo nechshav kemishkan kemigdash uchemizbeach. Now, the physical action of this man, the kadosh, the holy person, the person who's attained this level of holiness, are themselves holy because he himself is considered as a mishkan and a beis hamikdash, the holy temple, and the altar, as explained further below. In accordance with the dictum that the sages of blessed memory said in the Midrash, Vayal me olav Elohim, addressing the verse that states that after Hashem spoke to Yaakov, Hashem rose up from upon him. The verse indicates that the Shekhinah had been resting, as it were, upon Yaakov himself, and the sages explained, Ha'avos hein hamerkava, meaning this teaches, because we see that this experience that Yaakov had, that the presence of God was elevated after he finished talking to God. So, like, he was that holy that the presence of God was there with him. See, he says over here, Vayal me'olav. So he says, Ha'avos hein hamerkava. This teaches that the patriarchs of the Jewish people are themselves the chariot of the Shekhinah. They carry the presence of God with them. Our sages similarly stated, Hatzadikim hein hamerkava. The righteous are themselves the chariot of the Shekhinah. If you look at commentary number 18, he says over here, the chariot is the vehicle upon which the king sits, and since it is ornate and resplendent, it is reflective of the royal majesty. Unlike a throne, which is confined within the four walls of the palace, a chariot brings the royal presence to the masses. Thus, the concept of Hashem's chariot means, on a simple level, that he chooses to manifest his presence on earth by resting it, as it were, on a great or holy person whose sanctity and elevated level of spirituality and conduct gives people an inkling of the greatness of the God, blessed be he. So this is a really high level, which we hope to one day attain. But just on a very simple level, imagine if someone were to say, wow, look at how such a person, a godly person, behaves. This must be a person of God. Meaning, you're able to identify God by seeing his creations. You're able to identify God by seeing, if this is what someone who follows his Torah looks like, then definitely his greatness, God's greatness, is unfathomable. And that's the true level we're trying to. It's interesting that we call someone who does that, someone who makes a Kiddush Hashem, someone who sanctifies God's name. Someone who sanctifies God's name, what does he do in essence? Someone who sanctifies God's name is someone who is, it's identifiable that when such a person you're around such a person, they are really someone who represents the Almighty. You see them, you're like, wow, this is a godly person. And that's what we all hope to do. And that's what I try to tell my children. I tell my children, whenever we go out in public, we go to the bowling alley, I say, guys, you have to remember something. Hashem chose us to be his people. Hashem chose us to be his representatives in the world. I said, when people look at us, they should see us as representatives of Hashem in this world. And they should look to us and say, wow, this is the way someone talks to their parents. This is the way someone deals with other people. They're courteous, they're nice, they're honest, they're trustworthy, they're refined. These are all things that what we want to do is be representative of Hashem in this world. That's what we're trying to attain. And that's called the Kiddush Hashem, a representation of God's name. Now, let's understand for a second, what is a Chilul Hashem? A Chilul Hashem is someone who desecrates God's name. Someone who desecrates God's name. God forbid, we should never ever be one of those. But they say, what are the people saying? They're looking at the person that's saying, this is a representative of God? If this is God's people, who knows what, right? God must, right? And that could be a terrible, terrible desecration of God's name himself. You have to be very responsible and careful. And this is what I believe Ramchal is aiming towards over here, is that we want to be the symbol through which people look and they say, wow, this is the chariot of God. This is the one who represents God in this world. What an incredible person. What an incredible God that he must have. This analogy is appropriate because the Shekhinah rests upon them. The presence of Hashem rests upon those who are holy. Just as the Shekhinah rested in the temple, in the holy temple, in the Beis HaMikdash. And thus, since they are like the holy temple and the altar, the food that they eat is like the same offering that was brought upon the fires of the altar. So this person eating food is not just a simple person eating food, just like everybody else. Oh, everybody else eats food. He also eats food. No, it's very different. He eats food in a way that is holy and sanctified. He eats food in a way that's dignified, where it represents, here's a holy person. This holy person, it's not just ordinary food. Because he is so committed and dedicated to the Almighty, he becomes a representative of the Almighty. And as such, what happens? He is able to take that food, elevate it to a whole new level. By the way, we see this same idea. We see this with Abraham, that when Abraham bought the field from Ephron, right? He bought Ephron's field. What happened? It says, Vayakam Ephron. The field got elevated. What does that mean? The field got elevated. This is in the third portion of the Torah. He bought the field. Actually, it was later in the Chayesara. After Sarah died, Abraham wanted to bury his wife there in the field of Ephron, in the tomb, right? The tomb of the matriarchs and the patriarchs in Hebron, right? What did Abraham do? He acquired it, and then the field got elevated. How did the field get elevated? What did he do to it that elevated it? Our sages tell us, you know what he did? Because he was holy, everything that he possessed was holy. He elevated everything around him. And that's what a holy person does. Since the physical actions of the Kadosh are themselves holy, and like offerings to Hashem, it certainly cannot be said, as with the Tahor, the person who has attained the level of purity, that it would be better if he were free from engaging from these actions at all. Ki vadai hu sheyeh nechshav le'ilui gadol el osam hadvarim shahayu olam al gav mizbeach. The physical actions of the Kadosh are thus valuable, for with regard to actual offerings, it was certainly considered a great elevation for those items that they would ascend upon the altar. So you take a physical animal, that animal now becoming an offering on the altar, made it so holy because it's in such a holy place. It's in such a sanctified place. Since they were offered before the holy Shechina, the holy presence of God. And so much superiority accrued to them through this service. Through what? The animal. Because it was in such a lofty place. That their entire species was blessed throughout the world on their account. Right? 22 over here, the commentary, you see. That is, each item that was offered upon the altar brought blessing to its entire species throughout the world. For example, the various bread offerings would draw Hashem's blessing upon all the bread of the world. And Bikurim, first fruit offerings, would draw Hashem's blessing upon the fruits. Why? Because it was in such a holy place. Because it was elevated to a level. Now, everything that was considered to be bread was elevated with it. Anything that was part of the first offering of the Bikurim, first fruit offerings, around the world, even though it didn't make it to the altar, it had that power on everything. That power of holiness. As taught in the statements of the sages in the Midrash, so too regarding the food and drink that the holy person consumes, whoever that holy person is, it is an elevation, an actual elevation to the food, and for that drink, when it is consumed by that person. And it is as if that it has been offered on the actual altar itself. It's an unbelievable thing. I mean, this is way beyond. I told you, we're not going to necessarily understand everything in this chapter, but it's important to learn it, to understand that there are things we don't understand, right? But the idea here, so he says over here, just as something that was brought upon the altar was elevated by virtue of its being offered before the Shekhinah, before the presence of God, so too, page 512 on the bottom, the commentary on the bottom, something consumed by a kadosh, by a holy person, is elevated, since the Shekhinah rests upon him. In chapter 1, Ramchal discusses the concept that when man utilizes this world in a way that fulfills the goal of creation, he thereby elevates that which he uses and elevates the entire world along with it. In this chapter, Ramchal describes the epitome of this phenomenon, the kadosh, the holy person, who has completed the entire path of self-perfection and perfected his divine service, elevates every material thing that he uses, and through this use, he brings blessing to the world, just like the offerings in the Beis Hamikdash. A quick story here on the bottom here. The illustrious Rabbi Moshe Horowitz was the Rav in Pinsk, which is today Belarus. The Chazon Ish related that during Rabbi Horowitz's lifetime, the non-Jewish farmers of Pinsk would urge him to walk on their fields at the time of sowing, for they knew that any field that he traversed would be blessed with an abundant crop. I'll tell you something else. Okay, this is cited by one of the leading Torah scholars of our generation, Reb Chaim Kanievsky. But it's an amazing thing. The Chavetz Chaim passed away in 1934. He lived 94 years, right? 1934, right? People over the years have tried, many people have made an attempt to move his burial place from Radin, which is in Belarus, to Jerusalem. And people came once and they said, we're going to try to do this. And they looked up while they were digging up the grave, and they see that the entire community of Radin, all non-Jews, were locked in arms, one with the other, around the cemetery. And they walked over, they said, what's going on? They said, well, you're not taking our holy rabbi. You're not taking him away from us. So they asked, why not? They said, ever since the Chavetz Chaim lived in Radin, and after he passed away, No woman in our city ever miscarried. There's never been a miscarriage in that community. They said, you're not taking our holy rabbi. These are non-Jews. But again, a holy person elevates everything that's around him. Why? Because a holy person doesn't live for their own experience. A holy person lives for the experience of connection with the Almighty. So food is not food. Food is a tool to connect with the Almighty. He doesn't see it as food. The pure person, yeah, he's going to elevate the experience, but it's not because his whole existence is holiness. A holy person, his whole existence is to connect to God. So food is only food because it's a tool for me to connect to God. A car is only a car because it's a tool to connect to God. It's an amazing story someone told me that they went to someone who went to Costa Rica for Rosh Hashanah. And they went, there was a bunch of Israelis. They brought in a rabbi from Israel that he should lead the services for them for Rosh Hashanah. So this Israeli guy picks him up, the rabbi and his family, and in their bags from the airport, and he drives them all the way to this far out retreat, to this resort that they had. It was in the middle of no place. And the car gets there, and he brings the rabbi in there. The rabbi came with a Torah scroll. The rabbi came with everything that was needed with the prayer books and everything. And this happened this Rosh Hashanah last week. And the guy's car broke down as he was trying to leave after he dropped off the rabbi. The rabbi is trying to say he's out in the middle of no place. Imagine calling AAA to your home. It takes 3 hours. Imagine in the middle of no place. It'll take 30 hours, right? So it's in the middle of Costa Rica. Who's going to come to help him? So he says, I'm so sorry. He says, no. He says, you have to understand. He says, the only reason the car made it this far was because I had a Torah scroll in it. Because the holiness of the Torah scroll made it so that the car can get it, can get all the way. But now that you took the scroll out of the car, now the car died. It means there's a level of holiness that we're able to infuse our world with through objects like a Torah scroll, potentially, but also for us, if we're able to get to that level, to be what is called a kadosh, a holy person, then indeed that is the ultimate level we're trying to reach. Ramchal now continues. A source for this concept. So we're saying things, right? And we say this all the time in all of our classes. Don't believe a word I say. Don't believe a word any rabbi says unless they're able to bring you proof. Have a source. So we said some very nice ideas, but what's our source? So Ramchal brings a source. He says, this is the concept to which the sages of blessed memory alluded when they spoke in the Talmud. Kol hamevi doron l'talmid chacham. Anyone who brings a gift to a Torah scholar, ki'ilu hikriv bikurim, is regarded as if he has brought bikurim, the first fruit offerings that they would bring to the temple. V'chein amru. Similarly, the sages in a different tract it says, Yimale guronam shatamidei chachamim yain bimkom nisachim. One should fill the throats of Torah scholars with wine, and it will be considered in place of pouring libations of wine upon the altar, which was an offering that was brought. Ve'ein hadavar hazeh. Surely, this matter does not mean this does not mean that the Torah scholars should eagerly pursue the pleasures of food and drink, God forbid. That's not what it means. Is shimalu gronam kimalit es gargaron. He says it doesn't mean that the sages should and the righteous Torah scholars should fill their throats with wine in the same way that one would pour food down their throat of a glutton. He says, rather, the concept underlying these statements is understood following the intention of holy physical actions that we noted previously. B'darkeim uv'chol ma'aseim, that the holy scholars who are holy in their way and in their ways and in all of their deeds, hine heimamish kemigdash ukemizbeach, are actually on the same level as the Beis Hamikdash, as the holy temple, and the altar. Mipnei she'ashchina shora aleim kemosha hoya shora b'mikdash mamash, because the Shekhinah, the presence of God, rests upon them just as it rested on the actual holy temple. V'hine anikrav lahem, and therefore a gift of food that is brought to them to consume, is as if it was exactly like an offering brought on the altar. And the filling of their throats, so to speak, with wine is equivalent to the filling of the holes of the altar with wine libations in the time of the Holy Temple. Why? Because they didn't fill it for their own physical purpose. They didn't fill it for their own physical desires. They were a complete vessel there to be one with the Almighty, to be connected with the Almighty on a very lofty spiritual level. They don't, I'm a scholar, I'm a sage, give me more food, feed me more. No, it's just the opposite. You see how careful they were, that they wouldn't eat one extra bite, that they wouldn't take one extra ounce, because they were completely consumed and immersed in holiness with connecting to Hashem. Although the concept of the above statements of the sages was food and drink, this phenomenon applies to all things. And we're in middle of page 513. And in this way, we may understand similarly, kol tashmishi ishtamshu midivrei olam, with regard to any object of the physical world that these holy ones, these holy people may use, achrei yosem kvar dvukim likdushasa yisbarach, since they are already attached to the holiness of Hashem, blessed be He. Hine ilui v'yisron hu ladavar hahu. It is indeed an elevation and benefit for that object, shezachal yosh tashmish latzadik, that it merited to be used by a righteous person. Ukvar hiskiru zechon levracha. Indeed, the sages of blessed memory have mentioned this concept with regard to inanimate objects. Be'inyan avnei hamakom shalokach Yaakov v'samer hashosav, like Jacob, right, in the Torah, where Jacob takes the stones of the place and he put them under his head, right? And the 12 stones became one stone. The 12 stones representing each of the tribes, they all became one. How does that happen? They're physical stones. When the last time you see stones getting, melted together? When was the last time that we saw I'm sorry.
Recording in progress.
I'm sorry.
Recording stopped.
All right, I apologize. So what we see here is that concerning the stones that Yaakov had by his head that became fused together, and he said under his head, Amar Atzadik. Rabbi Yitzchak said, Amar Rabbi, right? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, what did Rabbi Yitzchak say? Melamech niskaptzu kulam. This teaches that all the stones gathered to one place. And each one of those stones was saying, upon me shall the righteous one, Jacob, lay his head. Thus, it is a privilege for an object to be used by a righteous person. It is a special privilege for a physical object to be used by a righteous person. Ramchal therefore summarizes the meaning of Kedusha as explained in this chapter, and he says as follows: Klalo shel davar. The principle of the matter is as follows. Inyan HaKedusha hu, the essence of holiness is sheyeh ha'adam dave kol kach belokav, that a person be so attached to God, ad shebishum maaseh asher yaseh, that even during whatever material action he performs, lo yipared v'lo yazuz mimenu yisbarach, that he not separate from and does not budge from his attachment to Hashem, blessed be He. Ad sheyoser yisalu hadvarim agashmiyim asher yishamshu leechad mitashmisha leechad mitashmisha b'ma shehu mishtamish b'hem. This divine attachment is so great that the physical objects that he utilizes for any of his needs are more elevated by the virtue of his use of them. Right? So the fact that he uses these objects is already the reason for their own holiness. Mima sheyoredhu midveikuso umaloso bihishtamsho midvarim gashmim. Then the degree of which he descends to the level of attachment to Hashem and his elevated spiritual state by his use of physical objects. That means what happens here is instead of him lowering himself to those physical objects, rather he takes the physical objects and elevates them to him. And we're going to see more of this, but there's actually another conflict of program that we have going on now. So I'm going to get off the. We're gonna end this class. God willing, tomorrow we're going to have another class, and hopefully we're going to be able to conclude this chapter tomorrow, and hopefully be able to celebrate the finale of this book. Maybe, hopefully, tomorrow before Yom Kippur, we'll be able to, stand in front of the Almighty and say to Hashem, "Look at the work we've been able to do over 100 and more than 2 years, right? Over 100 classes that we've been learning Mesillat Yesharim together." So, my dear friends, thank you. We're going to end the class now. I wish you all a magnificent evening, and thank you. Stay safe. Don't forget to be safe. Stay safe. Be careful, and have a magnificent rest of your evening. To those of you,
Rabbi.
thank you so much. I apologize for the